The following lore included in Lost Notes Groupies is based on personal histories of sex, drugs, and rock and roll from the previous century. Any stories, as told to us, belong solely to the speakers and their memories. Previously on Lost Notes Groupies.
Why would Jimmy be interested in me? Who am I? And he's on a date with Pamela, and my girlfriend Sable wants him. I was in Hollywood and we were having a blast. And I just decided to go with it, because what else was I going to do?
You expect, when out and about in Los Angeles, to sometimes see a celebrity. But there's another level of magic when you spot not a movie star, but a cult icon. Seeing one of those local LA legends is like seeing a shooting star. This happened to me on the night of my 30th birthday, when I got a bunch of friends into a show at the Troubadour. So I got ready in an outfit I based on, literally, no joke, a picture of Pamela Des Barres from 1968, and then I took a group of friends to Dantana's, where I had a redacted number of martinis, and then we went to the Troubadour, and after, we would walk up the hill to the Rainbow for drinks, because at that point, why not? So as we're leaving the Troubadour, starting our walk up to the Strip, I looked behind me, over my right shoulder, just to make sure a couple of my friends were struggling behind, and there, right behind me, on Santa Monica and Doheny, was Pamela Des Barres, the legend, the icon, the Groupie Queen of Los Angeles. I had an out-of-body experience, which thankfully, 18 months later, Pamela told me she did not recall. I'm sure she's used to that shit, but for me it was a relief that I got being starstruck out of my system before we actually met. Which was when I went over to her house one spring morning in her hometown of Reseda, yes, the Reseda of Free Fallen fame, to interview her about, well, everything. Her home is a human-scale memorabilia chest. It's incredible. When I saw how much vintage Disneyland merchandise peppered her walls, alongside pictures detailing her own rock and roll legend, it all of a sudden became so endearingly, tenderly clear to me how much Miss Pamela believes in magic, and how much of her own story, at times, sounds like a real-life Hollywood fairy tale. And for Pamela, that fairy tale begins as a young girl in the Valley, with a very special room of her own.
The Bop Room was a room that was designated for me to dance. I've always loved to dance. I called it the Bop Room because it was where my music was, my record player. I mean, I was obsessed with music. My precious time with my dad was swap meets, yard sales, and all of that. And he took me to a friend's garage sale and told me I could pick out anything I wanted. I saw a stack of records, and I picked two. One was Great Balls of Fire by Jerry Lee Lewis, and the other was Jailhouse Rock by Elvis. And the flip side, though, was Treat Me Nice. So that's the one I got into on my little kitty record player. Played it endlessly, drove my mom insane with that one song. And something about it just captivated me. I wanted to know, what did he mean, treat him nice? You know, I was too young. I was too young to figure that out. But I got it sooner than later, and I wanted to treat musicians nice, like Elvis wanted.
Pamela's affections started with Elvis, moved on to Dion, then the Beatles, and soon after, the Rolling Stones.
I mean, my first orgasm was really probably listening to the Stones play by myself in my Bop Room. I listened to that song, It's All Right by the Stones, and had that orgasm, and like, oh my God, what the heck is going on?
And that very question led her on a path, an investigative quest, a lifelong journey to find herself, and what the heck she wanted out of life, sex, music, even God, in the wild world of rock and roll. From KCRW and Golden Teapot, this is Lost Notes Groupies, and I'm Dylan Tupper-Ruper. This season, I'm taking you into the world of the legendary rock and roll groupies of the Sunset Strip, from the pill to the dawn of punk. And this is the story of Miss Pamela, how a girl from the Valley became the Groupie Queen of Hollywood. And probably of all time. Pamela Des Barres' first tell-all memoir, I'm With the Band, was a bestseller when it came out in 1987. It's canon in rock and roll literature, and it enshrined her as the ultimate groupie.
When I went out with I'm With the Band, my first show was the frickin' Today Show. Brian Gumbel said, here she is, Pamela Des Barres, Queen of the Groupies. And I went, Queen of the Groupies? No one ever called me that before.
But she took the crown and ran with it. She's the gateway groupie. I'm With the Band is not just a memoir or a salacious sexual tell-all. It's also a historical document, an insider's view of the evolution of rock music in Los Angeles from a young woman's perspective. Pam's bop room was where her rock and roll fandom germinated. She was an utter Beatlemaniac who performed nightly seances so Paul might fall in love with her. She was devoted to Elvis, whose appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show was a formative sexual awakening. She also was a little detective, searching her surrounds for any clues of rock and roll existence that she could tap into.
There was a band that moved in across the street. They never became famous, the Rainbow Rockers. And that helped me realize that musicians were just humans like me. And and I could meet them. They weren't all Elvis or Dion.
When Pam was a senior in high school, she made a friend who brought her out of Reseda and into the real world.
My friend Victor Hayden came to my high school the last year, and he turned me on to Dylan, and he turned me on to his cousin, Captain Beefhart. So that was a massive experience, Victor and Beefhart. He invited me to see him play at the Teen Fair at the Hollywood Palladium. And it was so ironic. He was so out of place there.
Captain Beefhart was a strange new act who stood out like a crooked thumb at the teenage fair, otherwise filled with a dozen garage bands with names that all started with the. Beefhart's eccentric vibe signaled that these weren't just your regular rock and rollers. These were something new. These were Hollywood freaks. And you know what they say. Freak, recognize freak.
It was very strange to meet him there. But he saw something in me, and he looked me up and down and said, you're a gas. I wish there were more people like you. And I was, really? I was just this kid from Reseda. He gave me some importance. He put some importance in my mind that I could be more than I had imagined as a cheerleader at Cleveland High and those kind of things. That was a huge moment for me. He and Victor both started calling me Pamela. I was Pam up until then. And I went, oh, that sounds much better. Everybody had called me Pam my whole life. And so I became Pamela. It was a transformation, really. So I started imagining, more. I wasn't going to be stuck in the valley. I didn't want to be stuck in the valley. I didn't know quite what, though. But I wanted it to be creative. I wanted to be seen and noticed. My parents bought me a car for our 16th birthday. It was a 59 Chevy Impala convertible. So it was pretty great. I would drive that over the hill to the Strip. I learned right away that Hollywood is where I wanted to be. Of course, Hollywood is not like it was, sadly. But at the time, man, it truly was the most magical, sensational, anything could happen place right over the hill.
Pamela started spending more and more time in Hollywood with Victor and Captain Beefhart.
And I saw the Magic Band whenever I could. I actually became a fan club president of the Valley chapter, fan club president of Captain Beefhart's Magic Band. That was pretty cool.
She was in high school, living with her parents in Reseda, but she was starting to get a taste of the rock and roll life that lay just on the other side of the hill. Back in the bop room, she had transformed her virginal horniness into an art. Literally, having painted, in oils, her vision of what Mick Jagger's balls might look like, just from her vivid imagination. But she wouldn't have to use her imagination for all that much longer. In the spring of 1965, the Rolling Stones were on their third ever American tour.
Right around the time I was getting incredibly horny. So Mick became a focal point for me. I wanted to get to know him, so to speak.
Like plenty of teenage girls in 1965, Pamela was lusting after Mick Jagger. But unlike all those other girls, Pam had an in. Friend of the Stones, Don Van Vliet, better known to music heads as Captain Beefhart.
Don Van Vliet knew them, so he went with us to see them play at the Long Beach Arena in 1965. I couldn't scream and yell because I was with Don Van Vliet.
Beefhart, instantly charmed, had decided to take Pamela under his wing. He wasn't famous yet, but he was very much connected to that rock world that Pamela wanted to be a part of.
He saw something in me that I couldn't ruin. I didn't want to be a teeny bopper, scream, right, make a fool of myself. So I just watched the Stones with him, and inside of just going, ugh!
The next night, Pamela and Beefhart wound up at the Ambassador Hotel on Wilshire Boulevard because they were invited over by the Rolling Stones.
Unfortunately, we were with Bill and Charlie. That was fine. That was fine. But I wanted to meet Mick. They were listening to blues. I'd never heard blues before. And Victor was nodding his head. And so I said, okay, I better nod my head. I didn't know what to do about the blues. So I decided I wanted to meet Mick. I went to his bungalow, scared, petrified, shaking, nervous, but I was going to do it. And I knocked on his door, and he opened the door. I could still see it. You know how you see these visions? There was this light coming down on his naked body. He opened the door naked. And I was so startled. I just ran. I yelped and ran into the night. I wasn't ready for Mick yet.
Rock stars of the British invasion were flocking to Los Angeles. But a unique set of circumstances made one street, in particular, the hotbed for music history in the making. At the foot of the Hollywood Hills, in what is now West Hollywood, lies the Sunset Strip, a 1.7-mile stretch of Sunset Boulevard that runs between Hollywood proper and Beverly Hills. The Strip's reputation for vice and glamour and a good time goes way back. For most of the 20th century, the Strip was unincorporated LA County, which meant that it was out of the LAPD's jurisdiction. In other words, during Prohibition, it was the place to drink. In the 40s and 50s, the Hollywood mob ruled, and the Strip was as famous for glitzy movie star nightlife as much as it was for gambling and high-class brothels. That is, until the early 60s, when county sheriffs swooped in to clean things up, and that old-school style of glamorous debauchery moved to Vegas, as the Strip became vacant and run down. Cheap rent drew in hippies and bohemians, and this all bred a whole new kind of nightlife in the early to mid-60s. There were music venues with bars in them, but due to some clever lobbying by club owners and record companies, in '65, the county created a tiered licensing system that, in short, allowed kids under 18 inside many of the local clubs. In addition, there were all new 24-hour diners and coffee houses and liquorless all-ages venues. So all of a sudden, there were tons of spots within walking distance where teens could hang out and go to shows. The Strip became a mix of entertainment industry and hippie counterculture and rock and roll, and that attracted the youth in masses, including young Pamela Miller, who had found her own cultural paradise.
So I just started going to the Strip. There were love-ins I would go to on the weekends. I would doll up. I met a girl in high school whose grandma was like a mother to her, and she let us go through her cedar chest, and I found velvets and silks and clothes that no one was wearing back then. So I got all these amazing velvets and lace and chiffon gowns from the 30s and stuff. So I started wearing that, and I started standing out. And I met girls, like-minded girls on the Strip.
The Sunset Strip was a special place in LA history not just for the counterculture, but for the simple fact that it was one of LA's most vibrant pedestrian scenes. Kids would arrive and just walk up and down, and that's how the scene really began.
And you start there, Pandora's Box, spend some time there, then you'd go all the way to Doheny. The route was just back and forth on the Sunset Strip. You walk up to Doheny, past Ben Frank's, past the ice cream place we all loved, and all the way past the whiskey, and all the way down to the end of Doheny and back.
So Pandora's Box, the club where Pamela's circuit began, was a shoebox-size, all-ages venue that sat at the five-way intersection of Sunset and Crescent Heights, at the base of Laurel Canyon. Present day, it is now that weird, empty concrete island across the street from Trader Joe's. Back then, it was the cool spot, where the underage set could see bands like the Byrds or the Beach Boys. Because the club was so tiny, it was usually packed, and so kids would spill out of the club and onto the street, interfering with traffic flow. Remember, this is a busy five-way intersection. So commuters and local business owners finally got annoyed enough to complain to the county, and as a result, a 10 p.m. curfew for anyone under 18 was now enforced on the Strip. This was a major buzzkill to the counterculture. News of this new curfew, meant to stifle youth nightlife, set in motion 1,000 pissed-off kids who took to the streets in protest, and Pamela joined the cause.
We literally stopped traffic in all four directions at the corner of Crescent Heights and Sunset by sitting cross-legged in the street. And it really did turn into a riot. Some of the Hollywood boys got a little, carried away and tipped over a bus and stuff like that. So the cops came in formation with batons and started beating all of us up.
This demonstration turned into a clash with police. And despite support from celebrities like Cher and Peter Fonda and Jack Nicholson, the man won. Pandora's Box shut down pretty soon after, and the building was demolished. The protest came to be known as the Sunset Strip Riots, and the whole thing was memorialized in a Buffalo Springfield song. It's the one that's like, "Stop, children, what's that sound?" It's called For What It's Worth, and for what it's worth, it turns out the song that's the soundtrack to every single protest scene in any documentary about the 60s was actually written about fighting for the right to party. The curfew's enforcement was short-lived, but it had lasting effects. It changed the vibe. Real hippies moved north to San Francisco, which led to the Summer of Love, and the people that stuck around were less interested in politics and protest, and more interested in what Hollywood has always had to offer, which was a place to see and be seen.
You could see Jim Morrison staggering down the street, a couple of Buffalo Springfield, couple Byrds, whatever British guys were in town, just hanging out, just walking around, hanging out. It was a communal situation. Yes, it was thrilling to be near these guys, but you could approach them, you could talk, you could hang out. That was a very short-lived time.
The LA scene wasn't just all stars and wannabes. Hollywood had its own breed of countercultural weirdo, the freaks. They were a different brand than the hippies. And in the mid-60s, the Strip's true freaky vanguard was a man, a myth, a legend, named Vito Paulikis.
I'd met a bunch of girls in Hollywood who hung out with at this guy's house, Vito Paulikis. He was a wild man.
Pamela met Vito at his 54th birthday party.
That was a very old dude back then. And he was very, very naughty.
And he was also very crucial to the birth of the Laurel Canyon scene. He's often credited with inventing the term freakout. I mean, what would the 60s have even been without the term freakout? He had this sculpture studio where he also provided rehearsal space for the Byrds and Love. Vito and Frank Zappa ran in the same circle and were like anchors, or maybe more like antagonists, for the burgeoning rock and roll lifestyle taking root up in the hills. They both wanted to push the limits of art, of performance, of good taste. Because the LA freak scene was distinct from the beatniks or the flower children. It was more underground, edgier, certainly orgy-ier.
You know, he tried to hit on me, but I wasn't interested, and he never pushed it. But he was having sex with everyone. He was married to a lady named Sue, and they had a toddler named Godot. And so I started hanging out with that insane troupe of dancers. He was an incredible dancer and a sculptor.
Vito was the de facto king of the freaks, the OG hippie Pied Piper of Sunset. He had a retinue, a crew of eccentric dudes, and a bunch of very attractive, free-spirited, strangely and/or scantily clad young women. Most every night, Vito and his crew would head to clubs on the Strip and dance, hippie style, at rock shows. Vito and his gang weren't just on the scene. They were a scene. So the Birds and Love invited the dance troupe to perform alongside them for some of their earliest shows, just to draw a crowd.
So we started dancing with these people. And I became part of this wild group. Before then, I had been what I considered a flower child, love-ins and all that hippie. But when I joined their troupe, I thought I was a freak. And it did have a lot to do with Zappa's Freak Out and Zappa moving to L.A. And I was in awe of him. The first time I saw him was at the Lenny Bruce eulogy.
Comedian and countercultural hero Lenny Bruce died in August 1966 at age 40 from a morphine overdose. It was a tragedy in the Hollywood Hills. Lenny Bruce had a famous one-liner. There's nothing sadder than an aging hipster. Vito Paulikis was not offended by that remark, for in Lenny Bruce's honor, it was Vito himself who organized his high-profile memorial service in Hollywood. It was a who's who of countercultural celebrity. Frank Zappa, Phil Spector, Dennis Hopper. Everyone was there. And Pamela was also invited.
That was the hippest place to be on earth, I realized when I was there. This is the best place on earth to be, and I'm here. All these people are unbelievably hip somebodies.
It makes sense that in a room full of famous people, the person who stands out is the one who isn't already famous. Which was Pamela, who showed up barefoot in a velvet dress slit to her hip, balloons in hand, looking like the very goddess of youth.
Amazing things happened to me there. I got discovered by someone who tried to put me in a movie, and, you know, they were looking for me on the radio.
She's not exaggerating. The next day, a radio DJ was talking about this beautiful girl who had been spotted at the memorial, and that people, movie producers, were trying to figure out who she was and find her.
All of a sudden, I was like, oh, my God, I could be somebody. I have potential. I am in the middle of this incredible scene. Anything could happen. And that's how I felt all the way up until right now. Anything can happen. At a certain time, 68, 9, 70, I started realizing, okay, I'm in the middle of this very important era, and I'm where everyone on the planet will wish they were. I really got that because I was hanging out with the Stones, you know, and the Kinks and the Who and all the local bands, the Byrds, you know, the Doors, Love. I was everywhere.
Pamela was, and still is, the chief enthusiast of all that was going down in the 1960s on the Strip. It was a very specific moment in time. Just a few years after birth control was FDA approved, but a decade before the onset of AIDS. And it was the time of pot and acid, not yet, at least totally, cocaine and quaaludes. And the funny thing was, during those first couple of years of Pamela establishing herself as a groupie, she was a virgin until she was 19, technically speaking. She was courted and desired, even called out on the radio, before she even slept with anyone, let alone a rock star. She wrote about delighting in her leverage as Noel Redding of the Jimi Hendrix Experience and Nick St. Nicholas of Steppenwolf angled to be her first. She chose Nick, but later, Noel got his shot. He had once remarked to Pamela that she had kept her virginity, quote, well contained. But along with her virginity, not much else about Pamela's life was so well contained anymore.
We wanted freedom. Women The girls and women I knew, we wanted our freedom. I took my birth control pill on the Strip. I made sure people saw me do it. I didn't think of it as a statement even or anything. I was just living my life. There were really no rules about what women could do in Hollywood at that time, but I grew up in the 50s watching my mother take care of my dad, and I wanted to do that. I wanted to take care of some guy, but he had to have a guitar in his hands or a mic in his face. That's how I felt about it. And that was possible. I felt that was going to be possible. That was a goal.
Pamela became Miss LA, acting like a welcoming ambassador to touring bands. She took Zeppelin to nudie rodeo tailors. She took Jeff Beck and Rod Stewart to their first vintage shops.
Sometimes we just hung out with them, danced with them, would just smoke pot. I'd iron their clothes. I'd take them shopping.
Sometimes she would do a lot more than that. When Pamela had her heart set on a rock star, she would enact elaborate schemes to enter into their periphery. Not that she was hard to notice. Like this one time she wrote about in I'm With the Band, where she'd met her friend's next-door neighbor, Jim Morrison, on one afternoon, and was simply agog. It was a mutual agog. So having just learned what a soundcheck was, she showed up at 4 p.m. to the back door of the Hullabaloo Club on Sunset and Vine, where the Doors were playing that night. Very clever. Jim Morrison spotted her and instantly whisked her backstage for a wild and crazy night of huffing Trimar and various second to third base activities. This was likely out of some minor restraint and respect to his permanent Pamela, his longtime girlfriend, Pamela Corson. But it was like Captain Beefhart called it early on. Pamela was a gas, an addictive one. She was effervescent and charming and available. She wasn't just swept up or tagging along with these bands. She threw herself in the middle of everything, ready and willing to experience it all. And now, some rock stars were interested in experiencing her too.
It was a club in Topanga Canyon, and the Burritos were playing.
That's the Flying Burrito Brothers, of course.
We felt some energy shift. They were in the middle of their set, and we turned around, all the Stones had walked in. And I was like, oh my God, something's going to happen here, And it did. He came up to the dance floor and wanted to meet me. And that moment was huge for me, too, because I was recognized by a huge hero of mine. And he wanted to connect. For me, it was one of those, oh, God, okay, I am me. I am equal to him. I'm equal to anyone else. It was that kind of moment for sure when he kissed my hand and, okay, this could go somewhere. People ask me, how did you meet these people? Well, I was at the right age, at the right time, in the right city, in the right place, with the right men to want to go for it, because I was in that scene. I was immersed in it. I was somebody already. Mick came up to me on the dance floor. That's how I met Mick Jagger. And still, I was very circumspect. I wanted to be connected to the person I was having sex with. Sometimes, though, like the first time with Mick, it was like, okay, this is Mick Jagger on top of me. This is Mick Jagger. Here he is right on top of me. It was like, it took a while. After the first time, it was fine. But it was like something I had dreamed of, thought of, imagined for a long time before it happened. So I'm sure he was used to that shit. But eventually I became pretty comfortable with him. And I put him off for a long time because I was in love with Jimmy Page. And people don't believe that either, that I had these two men, these two gods, vying for me. But that's what happened.
Pamela kept meticulous diaries. Most of her entries are about her noticing, watching, documenting with a keen enthusiasm what was happening on the Strip, why the music felt so important and life-changing, and how she could get even closer to it all. She had already decided that her life was henceforth dedicated to rock and roll. She was now just experimenting with her place in it and looking for clues that would lead her further towards her destiny.
I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be a part of that to the degree that I was comfortable and people were comfortable with me being there. And Don really helped that. I spent a lot of time with his band, the Magic Band, smoking pot and just listening to them rehearse and stuff like that.
Don Van Vliet, aka Captain Beefhart, had provided Pamela with an entree into the music world. He helped her make connections, which would soon lead to one of the most important relationships in Pamela's life. Pamela had seen Frank and Gail Zappa at the Lenny Bruce eulogy and was fascinated.
They were over on the swing set, by themselves while Phil Spector was going on and on about Lenny Bruce. And
the Zappas were a part of Vito Paulikis' scene and seemed like this amazing weirdo rock and roll power couple. Pamela had been spending more time around Vito and got to know the other girls in his circle of artists, dancers, and freaks. And she met one who had a close connection with the Zappas.
One of the girls that danced with Vito was Miss Christine, and she was Moon Unit's governess. Moon was 6 months old at the time.
That's Moon Unit Zappa, in case you were thinking of another Moon Unit. Through Christine, Pamela started going over to the Zappa's home to hang out with her.
We started going up to the cabin, the log cabin in Laurel Canyon, and visiting Frank and Gail. My life in the valley was incredibly normal. So all of this was entirely different from what I was used to.
Pamela became enmeshed in the Zappa's very hip, very strange, very happening domestic realm. She and Christine fell into their girlfriend groove of hanging out at the Zappa's home, dubbed the Log Cabin. By day, they would workshop outfits, listen to records, and watch Baby Moon Unit, and then cruise the strip together by night in full groupie regalia. Everyone was enchanted with one another. The Zappas with this sparkling rock and roll sprite, Pam with this oddball bohemian artist dream family, and Vito, well, he was known to keep young women around, as Pamela noted in I'm With the Band. For his part, Frank dabbled with groupies, but Pamela made it clear that even though she was a full-fledged groupie herself, she wasn't interested in getting mixed up with Frank.
Even though he made his attempts.
Though her reputation as a rock groupie had begun to precede her, Pamela had rules.
I always loved the women with the guys, too, because that's what I wanted to be. That was my goal at that time. If someone was married, especially if I knew the person, I loved Gail so much, there was no way.
Gail was hardly much older than Pamela, but she was her role model. Also around the log cabin were a gang of girls, actual peers to Pamela, who were welcome to hang around there whenever they liked. Like Sparky, Sandra, Lucy, cool, free-spirited girls who were known around town. And they loosely formed a clique. They were the freaky girls on the strip who were already at every cool show and Laurel Canyon house party together. It was happening organically, but Christine took inspiration from Vito's dance troupe and formalized their crew. She gave them a name.
She invited us all over, all these dancing girls. We called ourselves the Laurel Canyon Ballet Company then. We were dancing with Three Dog Night and whoever would let us up on stage. Love, the bands we loved.
They were part dance troupe, part performance art, part love-in, and part Lee-clothed. Frank Zappa invited them to dance on stage a couple of times with his band, the Mothers of Invention.
He was just enthralled with us. He just thought we were adorable. I remember one night we got thrown off the stage in Orange County because we were underdressed. We were always underdressed, a lot of us. I would make dresses out of tablecloths, of turn-of-the-century tablecloths that you could see right through entirely. And we were just wild. This night in particular, we were wearing matching baby bibs that barely covered we called them Baileys for some reason. Our titties we called Baileys. Barely covered our Baileys, and diapers with big duck pins holding them on. And that was it. That's what we had on. And our hair was up in pigtails. So Frank was playing a very short time. He invited us up there, and boy, they didn't like that at all. The school mom type lady, threatened to, kick the band off the stage if we didn't leave the stage. And we had to stay in a little room for the rest of the show. We were very naughty. And at that point I said, wow, I am on the other side. It was making me feel almost the us against them situation started happening in my mind then. The hip people against the straights,
Mm-hmm.
that really pointed that out. Because I was just trying to have fun and be myself. We all were. We weren't hurting anyone.
Lest you think this whole Vito/Zappa freak scene is sounding suspiciously wholesome, there's a story in Pamela's memoir, I'm With the Band, that taints the rosy hippie hue a bit. She writes about one night in 1968 when Vito got Pamela and her friend Sparky backstage at a Chambers Brothers concert at the Shrine Auditorium. After the show, there was a party at Vito's place, which seemed harmless until it quickly turned into a setup to get Pamela and Sparky to witness group sex with a girl who Pamela said looked much younger than her, certainly way too young to consent. Pamela wanted to leave, but felt stuck. Her new friend Lucy was disturbed by the whole scene and said, "Good evening," with this air of disgust, and then they all left the party together. Lucy's frankness endeared her to Pamela, and they became close friends soon after. Lucy was a couple years older, and Pamela wrote that when they went out on the town together, she felt secure holding her hand. Although experiences with the dark side of quote-unquote free love tempered her otherwise unbridled enthusiasm for what was happening around her, Pamela never grew cynical. She was chronically optimistic about the new world that was unfolding all around her, full of creativity and music, and a belief that what they were doing could change the world.
I believed so heartily. We were wearing our hearts all over our bodies, it felt like, and it was sincere. And there were people around who were preying on that. But, I also learned a lot of other good things being in that dance troupe. But yeah, I don't know. I always see the glass half full. It's just my nature.
Pamela and her clique were everywhere. At every show, and Lovin', and bungalow after party. By the time she was really hanging out around the log cabin, she was asking Gail Zappa for boy advice on Noel Redding, Nick St. Nicholas, and her forever crush, Chris Hillman, of the Byrds and future Burrito Brothers. Frank Zappa was fascinated by the whole scene, of Pamela and Christine and the free-spirited gaggle of groupie girls in their orbit. These girls who loved musicians so much and went after that rock and roll life. It was like an anthropological phenomenon to him, one that was even bigger than the Hollywood scene. He saw that groupies weren't just a sexy little part of rock and roll, they were essential, foundational.
Frank got a label, finally he got a record company, and he was signing people. He signed Alice Cooper and a really nutty guy called Wildman Fisher, and he thought that our dance troupe should be a group.
So the girls of the Laurel Canyon Ballet Company weren't just a dance troupe anymore. They were now a band. And Zappa gave that band a name, the GTOs. It was an obvious reference to the Pontiac muscle car, but the acronym was meant to be left open to interpretation. Girls together outrageously, or groupies together outrageously. Or you could just swap out the O. Often, orally, orgasmically, whatever.
And he said, you guys should write songs and we'll record them. I mean, that day stands out probably above most days in my life. The fact that he saw that in me, wanted to know about me, wanted me to write songs, believed that I could write them, and then we wrote them. So when someone has that kind of belief in you, someone you admire that much, has that kind of belief, it's really miraculous. Frank Zappa saw something in me that maybe other people might see, maybe the whole world, you know.
Next time on Lost Notes Groupies.
So we wrote these songs about our crazy lives, and he took us in the studio, and we recorded them.
The outrageous beginning and abrupt ending of the world's first girl group of groupies, the GTOs.
It was a sexual revolution, social revolution, spiritual revolution, musical. It was a huge revolution, renaissance, whatever you want to call it. And I was right there.
From KCRW and Golden Teapot, this is Lost Notes Groupies, Women of the Sunset Strip from the Pill to Punk. This season was created, written, and executive produced by Jessica Hopper and me, your host, Dylan Tupper Rupert. Executive producers from KCRW are Gina Delvac and Arnie Seipel. The executive producer for Golden Teapot is Lauren Redding. Our senior producer is Michael Catano. Our supervising producer is Alexandra Nelson. Our research producer is Jessica Calvanico. Sound design and mix is by Michael Hardman. Score and original music is from Carmen L. Special thanks to Natalie Hill, Megan Ellingbo, and Jennifer Farrow.